To extract color palettes with CMX2, simply take the image in question that you have, hit Analyze. You'll see a palette show up briefly, and then you can change the samples around until you get something that you really like. The good news is, the samples can be changed later even after you apply it. So if you come to your image, you simply go to Apply Gradient. When doing this, you'll have all of your default settings applied immediately, and you'll have a palette already applied. You can change the samples around actively while the palette's there until you get different sort of variations on it. The smoothness slider underneath helps your palette become, well, a little bit smoother, so you don't have to worry about banding or any type of harsh changes in your gradient. The opacity can be changed directly from the UI instead of going to the layers palette, which is very, very convenient. If your grade is very heavy, you can always choose level and brighten it up or darken it if you need to darken it just a little bit. And within reason, this usually gets you exactly the palette that you want based on the color palette that you extracted from another image. As you can see, off and on, it could not be faster. Apart from changing your samples or smoothness, opacity, and level, you can also change the actual color swatches themselves. Simply by clicking on one, you can turn it off temporarily. So this dark green on the left here, I can turn that off and see what the palette looks like without it. Turn it back on by tapping it. I can turn off a couple of colors and see what the palette looks like. Down below, you'll see immediately what the palette appears like, at least in a representative form, as you turn these colors on and off. You can also change the samples actively and do the same thing. So if you like this better without the green and thought, you know, I did enjoy the green originally on the image, but I think I'm going to go without it, you can do that on the fly. Every other tool is still available. Smoothness, opacity, level, everything is still available even as you're muting certain samples. CMX2 comes with certain default settings, but we always encourage you to change those to what you like to do based on your workflow and the styles you like to see. So if you right-click or control-click the Analyze button on the UI, you'll see your default settings. You can overwrite the layer name if you prefer to change the layer stack folder that is output. You can change it to whatever you like. You can minimize the history steps, which you recommend leaving on. That's going to keep your history a little cleaner and allow for undos and things like that. We have a default of using fill instead of opacity. Let's say you're going to use a different blending mode such as hard mix, one of those blending modes that does react to fill very, very well. You can choose your default opacity. You can choose the default blending mode. Just full disclosure, not every single blending mode really lends itself to gradient map color grading, but you know what? We have them all there so you can play around with them. That's your default. Below that, we have blend if settings, which we'll talk about, but you can also have those as default. So let's say I make some changes. I'm going to choose overlay, and I'm going to choose a little bit stronger at about 60%. And I'm going to work with that. Let's see. Now when we apply, boom, we get a really strong look, 60%, and it's using overlay. This is it. You can change this constantly if you want, as your workflow evolves. Obviously, you can change it after you apply it, but if you have something that you tend to gravitate towards, put it in your presets, and at least you'll have something close every time you apply. This stems directly from my workflow, but these 5 buttons down here are the blend diff settings. This is going to allow you to take your apply gradient and blend it into certain luminosity ranges. The first one is going to allow you to blend it from the lowest luminosity and slowly fading away into the highlight. So the grade kind of becomes more transparent all the way to the highest, brightest white, where it becomes fully transparent. It's just another way to make the grade blend a little bit better without modifying your shot too much. You get the basic essence of the grade, but you still keep some of those highlights. Also, we have a different option where it only grades on the deeper shadows. That's a second option. Here it grades in the mids, kind of a different look, but sometimes it works exactly what you need. And then we can blend into mostly the higher highlights or start at the highlights grading and then slowly become more transparent as it goes into the shadows. And these are active and they can be changed actively. If you open up the layer stack, you can see that blend if, or rather layer options, have been selected, or rather they're triggered, and you can change those settings manually if you like, but 99 times out of 100, one of these buttons down here is going to give me the grade that I need. At any moment, we can turn it off. And don't forget, if you right click or control click, you can make that your default if you like using it every single time. And you can always modify your CMX settings later on. If you save your layered PSD file, when you open it up later, no matter what you've been doing on CMX2, you open up your file, it still has the CMX2 folder that you originally were playing with. You hit Get Gradient, and it'll extract the information that's in that metadata so you can go back to playing around and modifying your gradient directly in the UI. For more detailed tweaks, open the Advanced Editor located right here in the middle of the panel. Tap that and you get a whole new UI. Let's discuss some of the things that happen here. First of all, we can change our samples still, just like we can on the main UI. We can change our smoothness, and our opacity, and of course our level, all right here inside advanced. But there are more options. So let's go through each one. In the advanced editor, we can do lots of detailed things to all these color swatches. For example, we can hold down Command or Control and click a color, and that mutes it, similar to what we can do in the original UI, but now we hold down Command or Control in here, and we can do other things. Why? Because there's many other things we can do. For example, if you hold down Option or Alt and click a color, we can solo it. That allows us to see what the color is doing in what luminosity range on the image. It's a very, very powerful function because when we can see how that color might be affecting a certain range, and it gives us a better visualization. So if we click any color while holding down Option or Alt, we can see what's happening there. Very, very powerful function. Also, when CMX2 extracts a palette, it also analyzes alternates. So every single luminosity range that you have here, in this case we have 5 samples, so 5 different luminosity ranges, it finds alternates in the original samples that thinks might work for you, and you can choose that. So it says, okay, on this luminosity range in the dark area, I found this sort of olive color, but I also have this option of green. I have a black option if you want to go that route. And in the next range, it found, yeah, blue, which makes sense. But, you know, green also kind of made sense too. So we're going to give you that choice as well so you can play. And obviously you can try each one. And what's great is that these aren't just random suggestions. These are suggestions, or if you will, recommended colors that CMX has found that thinks, you know what, these could work too. Maybe you should play with them. And as you can see, as I selected those alternates, the image still looks great. The grade still looks great, but it's just giving me a slightly different flavor. Perfect for exploration. To really dial in your color swatches, there's another option you can do. We have scrubbing. In other words, let's say this blue right here, I like it. I have it selected. If I move my cursor over it, you'll see that 2 arrows appear pointing left and right. Click and hold and drag right or left and different things happen. How do we control what happens? Very simple. These 3 options here, hue, sat, and lum, or hue, saturation, and luminosity. So if I were to use saturation, click on my blue, and then click and drag to the right, I increase saturation. Click and drag to the left, and I decrease saturation. And I can do it again and keep decreasing saturation. If I go to hue, click the color and drag, I can change the hue a little bit. Now the hue range that it can change to is within reason. You can't radically make this blue into a neon pink. That's not a good idea most of the time, so it doesn't do that, but you can change that. And as you tweak it around, you can always choose one of the secondary colors that CMX recommended. Let's try this blue, and then you come to luminosity, click the color, and maybe you can brighten it. Now, smoothing generally does really, really well on this. Keep in mind that smoothing usually will solve most of your banding issues. This is if you really, really want to change the actual hue. You like the blue, but you want it warmer, you want it cooler, etc. Always remember that smoothness will be affected down below. You work with the upper palettes, the main extracted one, the alternates, the scrubbing, and then you see the result below. That is the palette that's being applied. If you don't want any of the smoothing, obviously you can turn it off, and then everything you do has more of a direct impact. At the bottom of the panel, we also have the blend diff options right here. So at any moment, I can turn them on or off. I can choose different ranges that might work, still boost the opacity if I want. I like that range. That'll work for me pretty well. Below it, we have 4 default blending modes that we can change. All we have to do is right click one of the blending modes. We can tap the little arrow and change. So these are the ones that I like to use the most. So I started with those on the defaults, but you can change it to anything. So let's say we leave it on hard mix. We turn on hard mix, but now opacity doesn't make a whole lot of sense suddenly because hard mix doesn't work that way. So we crank the opacity, hold down Option or Alt, and double click the word opacity. And now we have fill. And we can take our fill down. Usually works really well with hard mix, something small like 18% or 20%, sometimes as low as 15. Now hard mix, it's doing its look a little bit better. Don't like that? I can just peg it again, hold down Alt or Option, double click opacity, come down here and right click hard mix and change it to something else. Let's change it to, let's go back to our soft light, which I really like. Click on soft light, turn off that and the opacity to where I want it. Everything is flexible at all times. And while I'm here, I can try overlay and I can try hue and I can try color and I can just actively see if these, these 4 banks of blending modes, I can change to anything I want. Right click one and change it to anything you want just to kind of see. Linear light's a little bit weird, but hey, you never know. These options are there so you can play in advanced mode. And anytime you want, you can double click one of these titles like smoothness or samples, double click to reset it. Samples, level, etc. You can reset it to the default in case you're like, okay, that didn't work. Let me just start over and rebuild the idea that I was kind of working with here until I get something I really, really like. And of course, you can always change anything from blending modes to levels to the blend if, the smoothness. You can swap the swatches out to different alternates. You can click a swatch and hit hue and change the tone of it. There's a little more green. You can click luminosity and make it a little bit brighter. Then you close that out. Everything is represented here, and you can still continue to tweak all actively while looking at your end result.